This continued for not less than 3 years. In the meantime, Branwen reared a starling at the end of her kneading trough, and taught it to speak, and told the bird what kind of man her brother was. And she brought a letter telling of her punishment and dishonour. The letter was tied to the base of the bird's wings, and it was sent to Wales, and the bird came to this island. It found Bendigeidfran in Caer-sant in Arfon, where he was at a council of his one day. The bird alighted on his shoulder and ruffled its feathers until the letter was discovered, and they realised that the bird has been reared among people. Then the letter was taken and examined. When it was read, Bendigeidfran grieved to hear how Branwen was being punished, and then he sent messengers to muster the entire island. Then he had the full levy of 154 districts come to him, and he complained personally to them of his sister's punishment. Then he took counsel. They agreed to set out for Ireland and leave 7 men behind as leaders, together with their 7 horsemen, and Caradog son of Bran in command. Those men were left in Edirnion, and because of that the name Seith Machog was given to the township. The 7 men were Caradog son of Bran and Hifaith Hir, and Inig Glw Ysgwydd, and Iddig son of Anarog Wallgrwn, and Fodor son of Erfill, and Ulch Minasgwn, and Llasa son of Llasa Llais Gynwyd, and Penderan Dyfed. Then a young lad was with them. Those 7 stayed behind as 7 stewards to look after this island, and Caradog son of Bran was their chief steward. Bendigeidfran and the army we mentioned sailed across towards Ireland, and the sea was not wide then. Bendigeidfran waded across. There were only 2 rivers called the Lly and the Achan. Later the sea spread out when it flooded the kingdoms, but Bendigeidfran walked carrying all the stringed instruments on his own back and made for Ireland's shore. Matholwch's swineherds were on the seashore one day, busy with their pigs, and because of what they saw on the sea, they went to Matholwch. "Lord," they said, "greetings." "May God prosper you," he said, "and do you have any news?" "Lord," they said, "we have extraordinary news. We have seen a forest on the sea, where we never before saw a single tree." "That is very strange," he said. "Could you see anything else?" "Yes, Lord," they said. "We could see a huge mountain beside the forest, and it was moving. And there was a very high ridge on the mountain, and a lake on each side of the ridge, and the forest and the mountain, and all of it was moving." "Well," said Matholwch, "there is no one here who would know anything about that unless Branwen knows something. Go and ask her." Messengers went to Branwen. "Lady," they said, "what do you think it is?" "Though I am no lady," she said, "I know what it is. The men of the island of the mighty coming over, having heard of my punishment and dishonour." "What is the forest they see on the sea?" "Masts of ships and yard arms," she said. "Oh, what was the mountain they saw alongside the ships?" "That was Bendigeidfran, my brother, wading across. There's no ship big enough for him." "And what was the very high ridge, and the lake on each side of the ridge?" "That was him looking at this island. He is angry. The 2 lakes on either side of the ridge are his 2 eyes on each side of his nose." Then they quickly mustered all the fighting men of Ireland and of the coastal regions and took counsel. "Lord," said his men to Matholwch, "the only advice is to retreat across the Liffey, and put the Liffey between you and him, and then destroy the bridge that crosses the river. There are lodestones on the riverbed. Neither ships nor vessels can sail across." They retreated over the river and destroyed the bridge. Bendigeidfran landed with his fleet and approached the riverbank. "Lord," said his nobleman, "you know the strange thing about the river. No one can sail across it, nor is there a bridge. What shall we do for a bridge?" "Nothing, except that he who is a leader, let him be a bridge," said Bendigeidfran. "I will be a bridge." This was the first time that saying was uttered, and it is still used as a proverb. Then, after Bendigeidfran had laid down across the river, hurdles were placed on top of him, and his men walked over to the other side. Then, as soon as he got up, Matholwch's messengers approached him and greeted him and addressed him on behalf of Matholwch, his kinsman, who, they said, wished nothing but good to come Bendigeidfran's way. "And Matholwch is giving the kingship of Ireland to Gwen, son of Matholwch, your nephew, your sister's son, and will invest him in your presence to make up for the injustice and injury that was done to Branwen. and make provision for Matholwch wherever you like, either here or in the island of the mighty." "Well," said Bendigeidfran, "if I myself cannot have the kingship, perhaps I should take advice regarding your message. But until a better response comes, you will get no answer from me." "Very well," they said. "We will bring you the best response we can get. Wait for our message." "I will if you return quickly," he said. The messengers sent off and went to Matholwch. "Lord," they said, "prepare a better response for Bendigeidfran. He would not listen at all to the one we took him." "My men," he said, "what is your advice?" "Lord, there is only one thing to do. He has never been able to fit inside a house. Build a house in his honour, so that there is room for him and the men of the island of the mighty in one half of the house, and for you and your troops in the other, and place your kingship at his disposal, and pay homage to him. And because of the honour in building the house, for he has never had one into which he would fit, he will make peace with you." The messengers took this offer to Bendigeidfran, and he took advice. He decided to accept, and that was all done on Branwen's advice, because she feared that the country would be laid waste. So the terms of peace were arranged, and the house was built, large and spacious. But the Irish had a cunning plan. They placed a peg on either side of each column of the 100 columns in the house, and hung a hide bag on each peg with an armed man in each one of them. Efnisien entered the house ahead of the troops of the island of the mighty, and cast fierce, ruthless glances around the house. He caught sight of the hide bags along the pillars. "What is in this bag?" he said to one of the Irishmen. "Flour, friend," he answered. Efnisien prodded the bag until he found the man's head, and he squeezed the head until he could feel his fingers sinking into the brain through the bone. He left that one and put his hand on another bag and asked, "What have we here?" "Flour, friend," said the Irishman. Efnisien played the same game with each of them, so that not a man was left alive of the entire 200 apart from one, and he came to that one and asked, "What have we here?" "Flour, friend," said the Irishman. Efnisien prodded the bag until he found the man's head, and just as he had squeezed the heads of the others, so he squeezed this one. He could feel armour on the head of this one. He did not let him go until he had killed him, and then he sang an englyn. "There is in this bag a different kind of flour. Champions, warriors, attackers in battle, against fighters prepared for combat." Then the troops entered the house. The men of the island of Ireland entered the house on the one side, and the men of the island of the mighty on the other. As soon as they sat down, they were reconciled, and the boy was invested with the kingship. Then, when peace had been made, Bendigeidfran called the boy to him. The boy went from Bendigeidfran to Manawydan, and everyone who saw him loved him. From Manawydan, Nisien the son of Urosydd called the boy to him. The boy went to him graciously. "Why does my nephew, my sister's son, not come to me?" said Efnisien. "Even if he were not king of Ireland, I would still like to make friends with the boy." "Let him go gladly," said Bendigeidfran. The boy went to him cheerfully. "I confess to God," said Efnisien to himself, "the outrage I shall now commit is one the household will never expect." And he got up, and he took the boy by the feet, and immediately, before anyone in the house could lay a hand on him, he hurled the boy headfirst into the fire. When Branwen saw her son burning in the fire, she tried to jump into it from where she was sitting between her two brothers. But Bendigeidfran seized her with one hand and seized a shield with the other. Then everyone in the house leapt up, and that was the greatest uproar ever by a crowd in one house, as each one took up weapons. Then Morthwydd Tyllion said, "Hounds of Gwen, beware of Morthwydd Tyllion." As each went for his weapons, Bendigeidfran held Branwen between his shield and his shoulder. The Irish began to kindle a fire under the Cauldron of Rebirth. Then they threw the corpses into the cauldron until it was full, and they would get up the next morning fighting as well as before, except that they could not talk. When Efnisien saw the corpses, and no room anywhere for the men of the island of the mighty, he said to himself, "O God, woe is me that I am the cause of this mountain of the men of the island of mighty, and shame on me unless I try to save them from this." He crept in among the Irish corpses, and two bare-backed Irishmen came up to him and threw him into the cauldron as if he were a dead Irishman. He stretched himself out in the cauldron so that it broke into 4 pieces, and his own heart broke too. And because of that, such victory as there was went to the men of the island of the mighty. But there was no real victory, except that 7 men escaped, and Bendigeidfran was wounded in the foot with a poisoned spear. The 7 who escaped were Pryderi, Manawydan, Glythiau son of Taran, Taliesin, Unog, Grythiau son of Muriel, and Halen son of Gwyn Hen. Then Bendigeidfran ordered his head to be cut off, and take my head," he said, "and carry it to the Gwynfryn in London, and bury it with its face towards France, and it will take you a long time. You will feast in Harlech for 7 years with the birds of Rhiannon singing to you, and you will find the head to be as good company as it ever was when it was on me, and you will stay for 80 years in Gwales in Penfro. And as long as you do not open the door towards Aberhenfelen facing Cornwall, you can remain there and the head will not decay. But as soon as you open that door, you can stay no longer. Make for London to bury the head, and now set off across the sea." Then his head was cut off, and they set out across the sea with the head, those 7 men and Branwen as the 8th. They came ashore at Aber in Talabolion, and then they sat down and rested. She looked at Ireland and at the island of the mighty, what she could see of them. "O Son of God," she said, "woe that I was ever born. 2 good islands have been laid waste because of me." She gave a mighty sigh, and with that her heart broke. And they made a 4-sided grave for her, and buried her there on the banks of the Allow. Then the 7 men journeyed towards Harlech, carrying the head. As they were travelling, they met a company of men and women. "Do you have any news?" said Manawydan. "No," they replied, "except that Caswallon, son of Beli, has overrun the island of the mighty, and is crowned king in London." "What happened to Caradog, son of Bran, and the 7 men who were left with him on this island?" they said. "Caswallon attacked them, and 6 men were killed, and Caradog's heart broke from bewilderment at seeing the sword kill his men, and not knowing who killed them. For Caswallon had put on a magic cloak, so that no one could see him killing the men, they could only see the sword. Caswallon did not want to kill Caradog. He was his nephew, you see, his cousin's son, and he was one of the 3 people who broke their hearts from sorrow. Bendigeidfran Dyfed, who was a young lad with the 7 men, escaped to the woods." Then the 7 went to Harlech, and sat down and were regaled with food and drink. As soon as they began to eat and drink, 3 birds came and began to sing them a song, and all the songs they had heard before were harsh compared to that one. They had to gaze far out over the sea to catch sight of the birds, yet their song was as clear as if the birds were there with them, and they feasted for 7 years. At the end of the 7th year they set out for Gwales in Penfro. There was a pleasant royal dwelling for them there above the sea, and there was a large hall, and they went to the hall. They could see 2 doors open. The 3rd door was closed, the one facing Cornwall. "See over there," said Manawydan, "the door we must not open." That night they stayed there contented and lacking nothing, and of all the sorrow they had themselves seen and suffered, they remembered none of it, nor of any grief in the world. And there they spent 80 years, so that they were not aware of ever having spent a more pleasurable or more delightful time. It was no more unpleasant than when they first arrived, nor could anyone tell by looking at the other that he had aged in that time. Having the head there was no more unpleasant than when Bendigeidfran had been alive with them. Because of those 80 years, this was called the Assembly of the Noble Head. The one which went to Ireland was the Assembly of Branwen and Matholwch. One day, Halin, son of Gwyn, said, "Shame on my beard unless I open the door to find out if what they say about it is true." He opened the door and looked at Cornwall and at Aberhenfelen. And when he looked, every loss they had ever suffered, and every kinsman and companion they had lost, and every ill that had befallen them was as clear as if they had encountered it in that very place, and most of all concerning their Lord. And from that moment they could not rest, but made for London with the head. Although the road was long, they came at last to London and buried the head on the Gwynfryn. And that was one of the 3 fortunate concealments when it was concealed, and one of the 3 unfortunate disclosures when it was disclosed. For no oppression would ever come across the sea to this island while the head was in that hiding place. And that is how their story goes. Their tale is called The Men Who Set Out from Ireland. In Ireland, no one was left alive except for 5 pregnant women in a cave in the wilds of Ireland. Those 5 women, at exactly the same time, gave birth to 5 sons. And they reared those 5 sons until they were big lads, and their thoughts turned to women, and they lusted after them. Then each lad slept promiscuously with each other's mother, and lived in the land and ruled it, and divided it between the 5 of them. And the 5 provinces of Ireland still reflect that division. And they searched the country where battles had taken place, and found gold and silver until they grew wealthy. And that is how this branch of the Mabinogi ends, concerning the blow to Branwen, which was one of the 3 unfortunate blows in this island, and the assembly of Bran when the army of 154 districts went to Ireland to avenge the blow to Branwen, and the feasting in Harlech for 7 years, and the singing of the birds of Rhiannon, and the assembly of the head for 80 years.